Chapter 11. Numbers are relative. More is not necessarily better. In Chinese culture, there's a belief that having too much luck or help in life is detrimental to a person's development. They'll become lazy and used to asking people for help without trying first. They'll be unable to learn the important life skills of failing, picking themselves up, and then failing again. And, because they won't know how to rely on themselves, it will make it difficult for them to accomplish anything. When Sun Tzu spoke about numbers, he wasn't talking about them in terms of physics or mathematics. He was interested in the relative nature of numbers. Picture a bowl with 5 apples in it. Is that a lot of apples or a few? Who's to say, really? We can't tell because it's relative. If the apples were placed into a large bowl, 5 apples might not look like many at all. But give those 5 apples to a child that hates fruit, and 1 apple is already one too many. Try to see beyond the raw numbers. Try to think about what the right number should be, rather than focusing on how to make a number go up. Consider what it might mean for the people involved. There once was a popular seller of trinkets whose wares were highly sought after for being able to fix difficult relationships. Couples would seek out his Unity trinket to help save their relationship. The couples would come from far and wide to see him. When they saw him, the man would tell them, in order for the trinket to work its powers, you must aim to not argue for 9 months. You must not mention affairs or get angry about old events and stories. When you're tempted to argue, hold the trinket in your hand and remind yourself that you don't want to break its power. As an observer reading this story, you're probably seeing through his little trick. The trinket didn't have any power at all. Its power came from coaxing the couples to play nice for 9 months. The man gave them a goal and prescribed them a means. He gave them the space to listen to each other more and to be more considerate and tolerant of each other. And why 9 months? Why not? It could have just as easily been 3, 5, 6, or 13 months. It wasn't magic. He just had intuition about the nature, couples, and the healing power of time. What could you accomplish if you also tried to build this intuition for numbers? It's a little tricky identifying these kinds of patterns and insights, but you're not starting from scratch. You know that it takes 9 months for a mother to give birth and that people naturally have 2 eyes. Just keep your eyes open for more. As someone who grew up steeped mostly in Western culture, there's an ingrained desire in me to strive for more. I continually want to compete, push for and achieve more. I want more money, more cars, more houses, and more holidays. In economic terms, I'm the classic rational actor hunting for choices that will give me the biggest payout. I can't help but use how much I've accumulated as a gauge of my level of success. The more I have, the more successful I feel. However, I can quite confidently say that the source of most of the suffering in my life has also come from this same constant pressure to balance buying all the experiences I want and making the most of my limited means. I would love the day when I didn't have to make a budget or feel guilty about that ridiculously expensive Herman Miller embody office chair I've always dreamed of buying. Certainly, this is not isolated to Western societies. Deng Xiaoping's efforts to introduce some of this capitalist motivation into Chinese society in the 70s and 80s earned him the nickname of the architect of modern China. Of course, I know that money can't buy you happiness. I've heard it all before. But listen, the desire for growth is so fundamental to the society and economy we live in that it's not necessarily a bad thing. Our greed can be a good thing, but only if you have the smarts to use the influence, wealth, and Instagram followers effectively. If you need proof, just read about any of the countless stories throughout history of smaller armies defeating a much larger one. It wasn't the raw number of soldiers that mattered to the outcome. It was how effectively the general was able to coordinate and mobilize them. Sun Tzu believed that having more of something, while important, was not nearly as important as how you could use those resources in the situation you were in. If we assumed that having more would automatically be beneficial, then we were setting ourselves up to fail. Many years ago, in a regional election in China, there was a promising candidate named Harris. Harris was experienced and quite well regarded, compared to his considerably younger opponent, but his competitor ran a brutal campaign against him, capitalizing on his youth and always finding ways to push Harris to his limit. On the day they were supposed to put in their names for the ballot, Harris unexpectedly announced his resignation from the race. His reasoning was revealing: "I'm giving up because I have too much to lose. You can't compare me to my competitor because, unlike me, he has nothing." Before the race, nobody even knew who he was. But I'm 60 years old. Everything that I have today was built through decades of hard work and sacrifice. But that all stands to be taken away from me if I don't win the election. My loss will be the only characteristic I'll be remembered for, erasing the history of the preceding 4 decades. He has nothing, and he has nothing to lose even if he doesn't get elected. Harris had more experience, more regard, and more influence. But he possessed so much that he couldn't bear the thought of losing his legacy. It's often difficult for us to accept that there are limits to our potential or to what we can accomplish. A great leader should be able to manage a 200,000-strong team as effectively as a crew of 20, but sometimes we're not quite there yet. General Hangsen was courageous enough to tell Emperor Liu Bang that he could lead 100,000 soldiers and not one soldier more, to his face no less. Hangsen not only understood that every person's capabilities were different, he understood that you had to discover your limits and work within those constraints. And the emperor was no exception. In war, numbers give us an idea of our relative strength. Sun Tzu says that when our soldiers are 10 times that of the enemy, we can try to surround them. When they're 5 times that of the enemy, we might attack them head-on. If we know that we're no match for them, then we should defend our positions or maybe even flee. But these rules are not fixed. The situation is constantly changing. We might start off with an army 10 times the strength of our opponent, but that could change during the battle if the siege claimed the lives of too many of our brethren. Napoleon was once praised by one of his captains by saying, "General, you have such mastery of your army, you always know how to claim victory with such a small army." But Napoleon responded, "No, I claim victory by having an efficient army." It wasn't about the pure size of an army, it was about how the army was deployed. If Napoleon had 100,000 troops spread thinly across 100 positions, then he had a small army. But if he had 5,000 soldiers focused on only one point of attack, then he had a large army. Numbers only made sense in the context of the situation and the people involved. Anfasi said there was no relationship between the size of a country and whether she was safe or in danger. Her survival depended on her understanding of her strengths and weaknesses, not her size. It also did not depend on the number of soldiers and generals she had. It was her ability to use them effectively in the right way. Our goal is to continually increase our ability to handle what's given to us. We don't want to be in a position where we have to impose limits on ourselves. If we're managing a team, we should be able to manage as many and as few as required. Resources are limited, so we should be able to use every piece of material and human resource that's given to us, lest they be wasted in our hands. You might not be there today, but you will get there tomorrow. Work within constraints. When Hangsen selects troops, the more the better. This common phrase praises Hangsen by saying that there was no limit to the number of soldiers he could lead because he knew how to best utilize each and every soldier. In other words, there was no limit to his leadership capabilities. Unfortunately, I'm not Hangsen, and one of the hardest realities I've had to come to terms with is recognizing there's a limit to my own skills and capabilities. When I was young, I believed that anything was possible. I had this unquestioned faith in the potential and opportunity that time graciously afforded me. I felt like I had limitless potential, like magnificent raw clay that was waiting to be worked into whatever shape or object I could dream of. As we grow older, though, we notice differences between our clay and others. We all start with a single knob of clay, but not everyone's knob is the same. Some have more clay than us, some have dry clay that requires the nurturing properties of water, and some have clay that looks rather odd to us. But rest assured, what we start with in life isn't all that matters. We'll eventually realize that what matters is the effort that we put in, and how we choose to shape what we're given. Some of us may be content with moulding a simple but elegant rice bowl, while others will try to make elaborate figures of animals. And if you've played with clay before, you'll know that sometimes we have to start over again if the walls collapse from us putting too much pressure on them. There's no shame in any of this. It's all part of the creative process and the wonderful diversity of life. But we can't and shouldn't expect to be able to make precise replicas of other people's work. That would be neither productive nor worthwhile. Focus instead on what makes something uniquely you and make sure that you devote your limited time and energy to keep something worthy of you. It's a curious human phenomenon that we don't like to feel restricted or bound. We love having loads of options, and we don't like to make trade-off decisions. It's comforting to have as many options available as possible, even if we know we might never take them. At the most basic level, this is probably simple, old-fashioned greed. And greed, unfortunately, is one of the strongest causes of delusion. When Buddhism first arrived in China, Emperor Taizong of Tang said it brought with it a subtle disease because it led people to believe that you would always be rewarded for doing good and you would always be punished for acting wrongly. Thus, all good deeds were met with an expectation of a reward, and when events went awry, they looked for someone else to blame. There's a Buddhist story of a man who won thousands of dollars. He sat and pondered what he should do with the money for nearly half a day until he eventually decided that he wanted to be a landlord. He went and found an owner of a plot of land and asked the owner if he would sell the land to him. But the owner wasn't sure how much the land was worth. I don't know how much land your money will buy, but this is what we'll do. You will walk north from here until sundown, and all the land you cover will be the land that I'll sell to you. The man thought this was a great idea and was very excited. But instead of walking, he decided to run as fast as he could to maximize his potential gain. He ran, and when he saw the sun going down, he ran even faster. But as soon as he stopped, he collapsed and died from exhaustion. The owner, who was intending to be faithful to his word, felt truly sorry for the man. In the end, he gave him the land on which he was buried, a total of about 8 feet. A man with 1,000 rooms can only sleep in one. A man with 10,000 fields can only eat 3 times a day. The items that people desire usually outstrip what they need. So here's the rub. Sun Tzu believed that everything in life had its own type of natural limits, and when those limits are exceeded, it will create change. Zhuangzi said, "A mouse that drinks from the river can drink as much as they want. But if it wanted to drink all of it, it would be swallowed by the river instead. A bird that wants to nest may choose any branch in the forest, but if it tries to make all the trees its home, it will not get any rest at all." Don't believe him. Here's a more modern example. When we're working for someone else as an employee, there's a limit to the amount of glory, fame, and expertise we can collect. Why? Because if we start to outshine our peers or boss, we'll be upsetting many people. Our boss will become jealous of our reputation and be more protective of the information they share. Our teacher will withhold their knowledge, fearing that we would surpass their skills. In ancient China, when an officer started to develop recognition surpassing that of the emperor, they were literally putting themselves in life-threatening danger. Change can also be created by frequency and volume. For instance, when someone has a great deal of love and generosity to give, it's viewed as a positive trait. But we also know that when they try to be generous to too many people, their generosity will become spread too thinly, and they won't have the same impact on people's lives. We have to be aware of these limits that are set by the laws of physics, our own capabilities, or the constraints of the situation we're in. Use structure to overcome limits. Have you heard of the story of a pilot asking Warren Buffett for career advice? When Buffett was asked by the pilot about what to do about his career, Buffett taught him a simple thought experiment. He told the pilot to spend time writing down his top 25 career goals, and then he should narrow those goals down to only 5. Buffett then paused and asked, "What do you think you should do about the other 20 goals that didn't make it to the top 5? The pilot said that he would work on his top 5 goals right away and put the others on the back burner, tackling them when he had the time. Buffett replied, "No, You've got it wrong. Everything you didn't circle just became your avoid at all cost list. No matter what, these things get no attention from you until you've succeeded with your top 5. I was lucky enough to recognize fairly early on in life that I needed some sort of process to help me become disciplined around working with the opportunities that life gave me. It became my creative process. Early in my career, like other good consultants, I worked hard in the office and stayed late at client sites to prepare for meetings and finish presentations that I was too busy to handle during the day. The team shared dinners together in board meeting rooms, and it wasn't uncommon for a few of us to stay until 10 or 11 p.m. It was grueling work, but satisfied. The work gave me a sense of purpose, and I felt productive. Then I transferred to a different team in New York. Instead of needing to stay late, I now found myself blessed with summer Fridays and being able to leave work at the reasonable time of 5:45 p.m. I was given 6 weeks of paid vacations, which I utilized each year without question. It was a privileged and luxurious life, particularly compared to most of the people hustling in New York. But I was left feeling unsatisfied. I had lost my sense of drive and purpose. I didn't know how to spend the copious amounts of spare time I had. What was I to do in the evenings? I started to drift and filled my time with possibly one too many social activities. I promise I'm not telling you this to humble brag about how easy I had it. I'm telling you this to show how easy it is to squander what we're given if we don't have the discipline or process to help us focus and stay on track. In my case, having more time wasn't helpful in progressing my life's purpose. I ended up wasting the time I had. On an ancient Chinese battlefield, there were other tools aside from weapons that affected the outcomes of a battle. Strategists understood that no matter how loud a general could yell, they would never be louder than the screams of a battlefield. Therefore, they had tools to help communicate real-time instructions to the soldiers. Banging drums told the soldiers to advance, and clashing cymbals instructed the soldiers to withdraw. Flags were also used to control the flow of battle and the formations of troops. Generals assigned units to different flags and used them to control their movements. If one flag represented 500 troops, 10 flags could control an army of 5,000. Generals could also change it up to confuse the enemy. Instead of one flag for 500 soldiers, they could use one flag for 800 soldiers to mask the number of troops they had on the field. Tricky. Overall, these tools improved control and the unity of troops when advancing and retreating. The brave wouldn't venture too far forward, and the timid wouldn't retreat on their own. It was structure that helped to overcome limits relating to the size of an army. Similarly, the next time you feel challenged by a constraint, think about how you could use tools to add organization and structure to the problem. When students go to college, sometimes they come across a professor who believes in giving students the freedom to choose how they want to study. They don't set guidelines for what students need to read or complete during the semester, as long as they know enough for the midterms and final exams. The theory is they're adults now, and it is up to them to organize their time. Students love this. They love the freedom. Or rather, they love the concept. However, students who go to these classes often perform worse than those whose professors are more restrictive. What do you think usually happens? Without a structure imposed onto them, students, as students do, leave studying to the last minute or misjudge the amount of time they have left. They choose to take it easy rather than spread the workload over time. Structure is a powerful tool that can be used to deal with the chaos of life. Let's talk about startups as another example. Startup culture has received a lot of attention lately, partly because startups sell their ability to create opportunities for connection. They usually have flat organizational structures, with only a few layers between upper management and the rank-and-file employees. As new members of the workforce, this was great. It gave them a voice and an unfiltered channel to express their views and opinions. As the almighty millennial leader Elon Musk once wrote, anyone at Tesla can and should email/talk to anyone else according to what they think is the fastest way to solve a problem for the benefit of the whole company. But this philosophy is not without its problems. In the early days, because leaders at Google wanted to keep in close, direct touch with the operations of the organization, some managers apparently had over 160 direct reports. Founders Sergey Brin and Larry Page were said to be reviewing thousands of weekly reports sent to them by employees. But while the convenience of electronic messaging has made sharing information like this possible, technology certainly hasn't done one iota to increase our capacity to manage. As the size of an organization grows, basic tasks will become increasingly complex. Just having 1-hour meetings with all 160 direct reports would take 4 days. Even Google has since had to backtrack from its ideals of having a perfectly flat organization to adding as many as 9 managerial layers. Sun Tzu realized that your effectiveness as a leader wasn't based on how many people fell under your command, but rather your ability to make sure people were able to showcase their talents. This meant keeping them aligned to your larger strategic goals, helping them to prioritize their work, allocating them the right tasks, and giving feedback on their performance. Much like using flags to control troops on the battlefield, division and structure was key. If you knew how to split groups into smaller teams, managing 1,000 people could be the same as managing 10. If you had 3,000 followers, you might split them into 3 groups of 1,000. And then you might further split one large group into 5 teams of 200. As long as you worked on ensuring free-flowing communications, it would be easier for you to maintain order and direction. Modern companies also use techniques like segmentation to help them improve their products and services. Rather than thinking about all their customers in the same way, they categorize them. They find the differences between groups of customers and then bundle them together. They can then easily provide different customer groups with separate types of products and services. For example, Hilton owns both the Waldorf Astoria and the Doubletree Hotel. The former focuses on providing a luxury experience to its customers, while the latter provides more affordable and modest accommodations. Segmentation creates simplicity. Structure and organization help us to focus, prioritize, and act. Without structure, we're easily distracted. We can struggle to make sense of what we're seeing, and we bump up against the natural limits of life. Understand the power of accumulation. Although a magnificent stallion can leap vast distances, he would not be able to leap 1,000 miles in one jump. But a sturdy horse, with nothing but the stubbornness to take it one step at a time, would be able to walk 1,000 miles, just like the great stallion. That analogy came from Xunzi, whose lesson was that the dumbest person could become as smart as 10 people and the weakest the strongest if they understood the power of accumulation. Warren Buffett claimed that the single most powerful force behind his investing success was compound interest, where interest is accumulated and compounded over time. His business partner, Charlie Munger, said, "Understanding both the power of compound interest and the difficulty of getting it is the heart and soul of understanding a lot of things." Most of us have an innate desire to accumulate wealth. Whether we understand compound interest or not, we at least know that we need to save money for the rainy day that'll inevitably come. But when it comes to the other areas of our lives, what else might we need to accumulate? Remember the label of a little person from earlier? A strong derogatory Chinese term used to describe wicked people. Well, it's also used to describe people who tend to sweat the small stuff, the kind of person who's constantly trying to take advantage of others to maximize their gain. Someone highly regarded typically isn't a person who's always doing calculations on what they can get out of a situation. But are little people so different from you and me? Because the first question I often ask myself when someone asks me for help is, what's in it for me? If I don't see the benefit of doing it for myself, sometimes I won't do it. Is this wrong? Similarly, I also often find that I have lengthy internal discussions with myself on how wrongdoing is okay, as long as it's small. If I'm not hurting anyone, what's the problem? Little transgressions like claiming a personal lunch as a business expense, it's a small, victimless, and petty crime. I know that other people are doing it, so why must I hold myself to such a high standard? You're probably right in that no single bad deed is likely to lead to any significant consequences. But in Sun Tzu's world, the name of the game wasn't about the outcomes of any one action or event, or, for that matter, even the outcomes of any one battle. What defined a person was their performance over the arc of their lifetime. The analogy would be a Buddhist monk accumulating good karma. Without sufficient good karma, they wouldn't be able to escape reincarnation or reach enlightenment. Doing one good deed might not bring them any immediate benefit, but if they did good deeds each and every day, they would start to create change. On the other hand, while doing something bad may not bring about any immediate punishments from God, if we consistently generated ill will, then we'd start to run into problems. While the consequences of actions might seem insignificant today, repeatedly having ill thoughts and acting out indiscriminately over time will amount to something significant. It will change who you are. And unfortunately, by the time we notice, it'll be too late to turn back. It becomes a habit. Habits are built up slowly over time through repetition, and if we haven't developed a habit for doing good and thinking in the right way, then we'll have instead built a habit for deceit. The effect will be barely noticeable, but its influence on how we think will run deep. Liu Bei's dying advice. Liu Bei was an outstanding leader who rose from his humble roots as a shoe salesman to become the ruler of an entire empire. Many outstanding heroes chose to follow him because he was able to connect with them on a deep emotional level. At the Battle of Changban, Zhao Yun single-handedly fought through an army to rescue Liu Bei's son from the hands of the enemy. When he returned the child to Liu Bei almost threw the infant to the ground in anger. He said, "Because of you! Because of you, I almost lost one of my kingdom's greatest warriors." To say that Zhao Yun was beyond moved in that moment is an understatement. In his eyes, Liu Bei valued him more than his own son. But of course we know the truth, because when Liu Bei died, he left his kingdom to his son and not to Zhao Yun. Despite Liu Bei's talents, he had to spend much of his time supporting his son, who was not particularly talented. Even toward the end of his life, he spent his last moments thinking about the future of his son. On Liu Bei's deathbed, he said to Zhuge Liang, "Look at my son. If you believe you can help him become a great leader, then do so. If you believe he cannot become a leader, then forget it. You should take over my kingdom in his place, because I know that everything I have today is because of you. You have given me all that I have. It was not because of me. So, if you choose to take it all, I will be willing to give it to you because I have nothing else to give you." Liu Bei knew exactly what words to say to Zhuge Liang, because he immediately swore an oath that he would be there to support Liu Bei's son until he drew his last breath. Liu Bei then asked for his son and gave him one final piece of advice. Liu Bei, great leader that he was, someone who created a whole empire from nothing, gave his most beloved son this simple piece of advice: don't judge any good deed as too small, and don't judge any bad deed as so small that it won't matter. It was a small and seemingly underwhelming piece of advice on the surface. But within this simple sentence lay the deepest of human wisdom. The mindset of accumulation was the piece of advice that came from a loving father trying to encapsulate a lifetime of learning.